Trump raises tariffs on steel and aluminum imports to flat at 25%. European Commission pledges €50 billion to bolster AI ambitions. And Turkey lifts restrictions on Syrian imports. You're watching Qnews and this is the Economic Bulletin. We'll bring you the latest developments shaping the global economy, from key market trends and financial updates to regional economic highlights and forecasts. We provide essential news and analysis to keep you informed. Welcome back. We'll start off with the United States, where Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell told the Senate Banking Committee that the central bank is in no rush to adjust interest rates, emphasizing the need for patience before lowering borrowing costs further. He warned that cutting rates too soon could slow inflation progress, while delaying too long could weaken economic activity and jobs. The Fed kept rates unchanged in January after 3 cuts in late 2024. Powell said inflation remains above the 2% target at 2.6%, but the labor market is stable, allowing policymakers to wait for clearer economic signals.
Sort of just a set of assumptions about what might happen, but they're really kind of in the nature of a placeholder, and meaning, you know, plausible could be, but honestly, you wouldn't stand behind it because you just don't.
US President Donald Trump has raised tariffs on steel and aluminum imports to a flat 25% with no exceptions, aiming to protect domestic industries. The move eliminates previous exemptions and quota deals, affecting major suppliers like Canada, Brazil and Mexico. The new tariffs take effect on March 4th, with Trump signaling more trade measures, including potential tariffs on cars, semiconductors and pharmaceuticals.
To the United States steel industry that those exceptions and exclusions have imposed, where now this order would tariff rate on imports.
President Trump has reignited trade tensions with the new round of sweeping tariffs on steel and aluminium imports, setting duties at 25% with no country-specific exemptions. While these tariffs echo the measures first introduced in 2018, they now eliminate loopholes that previously allowed some imports to bypass restrictions. Although China directly exports little steel to the U.S., Washington contends that Chinese overproduction distorts global markets. Some of its steel reaches the U.S. through third-party countries, a practice Trump's new measures aim to curb. These tariffs are expected to raise costs for industries reliant on these metals, including automotive, construction, and infrastructure projects. While American steelmakers welcome the decision, critics warn it could reignite a trade war. Canada, the top supplier of U.S. steel, called the move unjustified and hinted at possible retaliation, with Trump also eyeing reciprocal tariffs on other goods, including cars and semiconductors. The latest trade policy shift signals a more aggressive stance on global commerce.
In response, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has vowed firm and proportionate countermeasures in response to US President Donald Trump's decision to impose 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports. Von der Leyen condemned the move, warning that unjustified tariffs on the EU will not go unanswered. The European Commission is now reviewing its options, which could include reinstating retaliatory tariffs on US goods like bourbon and motorcycles.
Henry. When targeted unfairly or arbitrarily,
European Union Trade Commissioner Maros Šefčovič has warned that the US decision to reinstate tariffs on aluminum and steel imports will contribute to rising inflation. Speaking before the European Parliament, Šefčovič criticized President Donald Trump's move to impose 25% duties on both metals without exemptions, calling it a lose-lose scenario that could spark a global trade war. Despite the economic risks, the European Union remains committed to seeking a mutually beneficial resolution with Washington.
The EU sees no justification for the imposition of tariffs on our exports, which is economically.
Moreover, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has pledged a unified and united European response to the US metal tariffs, asserting that the European Union, as the world's largest market, has the strength to act. Speaking in Parliament, Scholz emphasized the European Union's economic power to counter Washington's trade measures following President Donald Trump's decision to raise aluminum tariffs at 25%. The tariff hike is expected to increase costs for industries reliant on aluminum, particularly in the automotive and manufacturing sectors across both the US and Europe. For Canada's part, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has criticized the US decision to impose the 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, calling the move unacceptable. Speaking on the sidelines of the Paris Artificial Intelligence Summit, Trudeau said that Canada would emphasize the negative economic impact of the tariffs and warned that Ottawa's response, if necessary, would be firm and clear.
Highlight the negative impacts on Americans and Canadians of these unacceptable tariffs. We will also be working with our international partners and friends.
However, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has said that the US President Donald Trump has agreed to consider exempting Australia from his newly announced steel and aluminum tariffs. This announcement came after what the Prime Minister described as a constructive phone call with the US President. However, Albanese expressed confidence that a deal could be reached, highlighting Australia's contribution to US jobs and defense interests.
Our countries. I said to President Trump that this was an issue of some media coverage in Australia, and that we therefore agreed on the words.
On another note, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has announced an additional €50 billion investment to strengthen the bloc's artificial intelligence ambitions. Speaking at the Paris AI Summit, von der Leyen said that the new funding will complement the €150 billion already pledged under the European AI Champions Initiative, with a focus on industrial and mission-critical technologies. She dismissed concerns that Europe is lagging in AI, emphasizing that the EU's approach prioritizes innovation, complex applications, and inclusivity.
this is happening right now. And today I can announce that with
US Vice President James David Vance has cautioned European leaders against over-regulating artificial intelligence, warning that excessive rules could stifle technological growth. Speaking at the Paris AI Summit, Vance rejected content moderation as authoritarian censorship and criticized Europe's strict AI and privacy regulations, arguing that they impose high legal costs on smaller firms. He reaffirmed the Trump administration's commitment to maintaining US dominance in AI, opposing the European Union's tougher regulatory stance.
But to create that kind of trust, we need international regulatory regimes.
AI Action Summit is underway in Paris, bringing together top tech executives and world leaders to discuss the future of artificial intelligence.
Use cases of AI.
Held at the Grand Palais, the event features industry giants like OpenAI's Sam Altman, Google's Sundar Pichai, and Anthropic's Dario Amodei, alongside government officials including U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, European leaders, and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. A key topic is China's DeepSeek, which has disrupted the industry with claims of a cheaper, more energy-efficient AI model. Meanwhile, Europe's regulatory approach is in focus as the European Union's AI Act begins to take effect, raising questions about balancing innovation and oversight. Unlike previous AI summits focused on risks, France aims to showcase AI's benefits in healthcare, sustainability, and job creation. Open source AI is also a major theme, with advocates arguing it could democratize the industry by making AI development more transparent and competitive. With the US and China locked in an AI arms race, Europe's regulatory stance and investment strategy will be closely watched. The summit marks a pivotal moment in shaping global AI policy and competition.
And back to the United States, we're joined from London by CEO of Quorum Center for Strategic Studies, Mr. Tariq Rifai, to discuss the latest developments related to US President Trump's decision to raise the tariffs on steel and aluminum, as well as the reactions from the European Union and Canada. Welcome to Qnews Economic Bulletin, Mr. Rifai. Now, how will President Trump's decision to impose a 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports affect?
Well, we've seen this scenario happen before, and specifically with aluminum and steel. It will definitely help out those industries in the U.S., but the long-term benefits of this, it's still uncertain. And actually, I think the longer this goes on, the least benefit any party will seek in this tariff war. So for the immediate term, I think Trump's positioning is to get people to the negotiating table and try to find something that is more beneficial to U.S. steel and aluminum manufacturers.
Mm-hmm. Well, what industries in the U.S. and its trading partners will be most affected by these tariffs? The automotive industry is an obvious one, but what other industries?
You mentioned the key ones. Yes, it's the automotive industry, but also in terms of manufacturing in general. There's a lot of steel and aluminum manufacturing in the U.S. for various types of components, from anywhere, like you said, from auto manufacturers to even the aerospace industry, which relies on these industries.
Mm-hmm. Well, Trump has suggested extending the tariffs to cars, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals. Now, what would be the economic impact if these measures are implemented?
As I mentioned, the goal is to try to get to the negotiating table, but Trump's reasoning behind these tariffs, especially when we're talking on higher end manufacturing, auto manufacturing, and higher tech manufacturing, is to bring these manufacturers back to the U.S. In previous years, we have seen auto manufacturers and other manufacturers head to Mexico, head to other lower cost, producers and assemblers to assemble these products and bring them back to the U.S. Of course, at the detriment of U.S. jobs. And I think Trump is trying to reverse this, meaning that if U.S. companies are manufacturing overseas, then they will impose the tariff on these companies. And one company that he mentioned specifically was John Deere. John Deere was thinking of building a new factory in Mexico instead of expanding in the U.S. And he specifically called them out, saying that he would impose a 200% tariff on this company if they were to go ahead with this plan.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Rifai, please stay with us. But ladies and gentlemen, we now move to a live broadcast of the U.S. President Donald Trump greeting King of Jordan, Abdullah II.
That's good. Great. Where's the way? Good job, man.
We're back, ladies and gentlemen, continuing our discussion with Mr. Rifai. Sir, now the European Commission has vowed firm and proportionate countermeasures. Now, what sort of retaliatory options does the EU have, and how effective really might they be?
The EU and the US, of course, are significant trading partners. Number one trading partner for the US, of course, is China. But if we were to look at the European Union, there are many measures they can take on manufactured goods between that union and the United States. However, I do think that the European Union is in a weaker position, mainly because its economy is in a weaker position. And of course, each country has different rules and regulations on imports and tariffs, et cetera, even though the European Union has tried to, modernize this. Overall, I say that if there was to be an imposition of tariffs between the two, trading blocs, I think the European Union is definitely in the weaker hand. And, the longer this drags out, of course, the worse it is for the European Union.
Mm-hmm. What about Canada? Does it have a weaker hand? The Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, called the tariffs unacceptable. What potential countermeasures could Canada take?
Canada is willing to impose, strong countermeasures. Of course, Ontario, for example, is a big energy exporter to the U.S., primarily New York State and the Upper East Coast. And of course, this will they're not afraid to say they will be imposing tariffs on this as well as other manufactured good and as well as other minerals. Canada, as you know, is a big mining economy. And of course, many industries in the U.S. rely on this. So they will retaliate, I think. However, Canada is more heavily dependent on the U.S. in terms of imports and a percentage of its economy than the European Union is. So without a doubt, Canada, if it were to prolong this, it would affect Canada much more than the U.S.
Yes, but Canada does supply nearly 80% of U.S. primary aluminum. Could these tariffs affect North American supply chains? Does it put Canada in a stronger position, maybe even than the European Union?
It does have, as I said, bargaining chips, as you mentioned, on the aluminum and other mining industries, as well as the export of energy to the U.S. However, because there's a larger percentage of its exports reliant on the U.S. market than the European Union is, I see that being affected more so than the European Union.
Mr. Tariq Rifai from London, the CEO of Quorum Centre for Strategic Studies. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. And now we move on to the latest developments from around the world. The British Retail Consortium has revealed that retailers saw a better than expected start to the year, with January retail spending up 2.6% from a year earlier. However, the British Retail Consortium warns that rising employment costs and inflation could strain businesses. Retailers face £7 billion in additional costs this year due to higher social security contributions, an increased minimum wage and a new packaging levy. Major chains have signalled a challenging year ahead, while Sainsbury's announced plans to cut over 3,000 jobs. A survey by National Australia Bank has shown that Australian business activity eased in January as sales and profitability declined. The Business Conditions Index fell 3 points to +6. With retail and mining sectors facing pressure. Despite this, business confidence rebounded to +4, the highest level since October, as firms anticipate a possible rate cut from the Reserve Bank of Australia. Markets widely expect a reduction in the 4.35% cash rate next week, which would be the first cut since 2020. China has unveiled an action plan to expand senior-friendly tourism train services, aiming to enhance travel experiences for the elderly and boost the silver economy. The initiative, led by the Ministry of Commerce and other government agencies, seeks to develop a nationwide system by 2027, with diverse routes, themed experiences and improved accessibility. Authorities will encourage private sector participation, introduce market-driven pricing, and welcome international operators to enhance services. In the MENA region, Director of Relations at the Syrian General Authority for Land and Seaports, Mezan Al-Loush, has stated that Turkey has lifted restrictions on Syrian imports. Following discussions with Turkey's Ministry of Trade, both countries have agreed to reassess customs tariffs on certain goods and initiate talks to reinstate the free trade agreement suspended since 2011. The move signals a potential shift in economic ties under Syria's new administration. Gulf nations have announced plans to invest $100 billion in renewable energy by 2030, aiming to cut emissions by up to 20%. The announcement was made at the 43rd meeting on future climate change management in Muscat, where experts discussed the economic and environmental risks facing the region. Officials warned that failing to act could cost the region up to 5% of the gross domestic product by 2050. The investment aims to position the Gulf as a leader in clean energy, including renewables, nuclear power, and hydrogen. In Egypt, the annual inflation rate decreased to 23.2% in January 2025 compared to 23.4% in December 2024. According to the latest data released by the Central Agency for Public Mobilization, the consumer price index for the country reached 243.5 points last month, showing a slight slowdown in inflation. January's monthly inflation rate stood at 1.6%, up from 0 in December 2024. It attributed the annual inflation decline to lower vegetable prices and a slight drop in fish and seafood prices. Qatar's central bank's international reserves and foreign currency liquidity grew by 3.7% in January, reaching 255.2 billion Qatari riyals. Official reserves rose to 196.1 billion Qatari riyals, despite a decline in foreign bonds and treasury bills, which fell by 7.6 billion riyals to 128.9 billion. Gold holdings saw a sharp increase of 12.6 billion Qatari riyals, reaching 36.7 billion, while balances with foreign banks rose to 25.5 billion Qatari riyals. Oil prices extended gains on Tuesday amid concerns over Russian and Iranian oil supply and sanctions threats, despite worries that escalating trade tariffs could dampen global economic growth. Brent crude futures were up 1.6% at $77.06 a barrel, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude rose 1.5% to $73.43. Both contracts registered gains of close to 2% in the previous session, after 3 consecutive weekly losses. Gold prices slipped on Tuesday as investors booked profits following a record high, yet remained bullish amidst fears of a global trade war spurred by U.S. President Donald Trump's new tariffs. Spot gold fell 0.4% to $2,896.53 an ounce, after hitting a peak of $2,942.7 earlier in the session. U.S. gold futures fell 0.4% to $2,923.5. In the global markets, shares showed mixed performance on Tuesday as U.S. stocks edged lower, with investors braced for more tariff policy shifts from President Donald Trump and focus turned to inflation, with testimony from Federal Chair Jerome Powell on deck. The future for the S&P 500 declined 0.21%, and that for the Dow Jones Industrial Average decreased 0.2%. In Europe, France's CAC 40 hiked 0.25%, Germany's DAX went up 0.26%, while Britain's FTSE 100 inched down 0.1%. In Asia, Hong Kong's Hang Seng dipped 1.06%. In Tokyo, the Nikkei 225 index inched up 0.04%. And Australia's S&P ASX 200 tiptoed 0.01%. These are all the economic updates we have for now, but here's a reminder of today's main stories. Trump raises tariffs on steel and aluminum imports to a flat 25%. European Commission pledges 50 billion euros to bolster AI ambitions. And Turkey lifts restrictions on Syrian imports. This concludes our economic bulletin for today, but please don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok at Qnews EGY to stay informed. I'm Henny Safe, thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates here on Qnews.